It's the 1990s, and some of the biggest pop stars in the world are at the height of their fame. They're appearing on television, selling millions of records, and performing for thousands of fans. But away from the cameras, their lives are taking a very different turn. In the final 24 hours, small details begin to reveal just how much they were struggling. This is the sad final 24 hours of 90s pop stars who committed suicide. We need to start in Seattle. Specifically, we start at 171 Lake Washington Boulevard, a large gray-green house behind a wooden fence, set back from the water on a quiet residential street in the Madrona neighborhood. On the morning of April 8, 1994, an electrician named Gary Smith arrived at that address to install a security system. He found a body in the room above the garage. It was Kurt Cobain. He was 27 years old. The last confirmed public sighting of Cobain had been 6 days earlier, April 2nd, when he climbed over the wall of the Exodus Recovery Center in Los Angeles, where he had checked in for drug treatment just 2 days before that. He took a taxi to the airport and flew back to Seattle alone. What happened across those 6 days is only partially reconstructed. His credit card was used at a Seattle gun shop on April 2nd, the same day he left the treatment center. Friends and family reported not being able to reach him. His wife, Courtney Love, hired a private investigator named Tom Grant to locate him on April 3rd. Grant searched the Lake Washington house at least twice during those days and did not find him. The room above the garage, a greenhouse space Cobain used as a private retreat, was not checked until Gary Smith arrived on the 8th. Inside, investigators found a note written in red ink, addressed to Cobain's childhood imaginary friend, Botta. The note quoted Neil Young. It spoke of not being able to enjoy music the way he once had. It did not read as a goodbye so much as an explanation, a man trying to articulate something that had resisted articulation for years. Cobain had been struggling with chronic stomach pain for years, a condition that doctors had never fully diagnosed and that had driven much of his substance use. He had sought treatment repeatedly and found nothing that held. He had sold over 75 million records with Nirvana. He had appeared on the cover of Rolling Stone before the band's second album was even released. He had been called the voice of a generation, a label he found not flattering but suffocating. He was 27 years old. His ashes were divided. A portion was scattered in the Wishkah River in Aberdeen, Washington, the town where he grew up. A portion was kept by Courtney Love. A portion, according to reports, was taken to a Buddhist temple in Seattle. A small amount was reportedly scattered in a New York City park by Love in the months following his death. There is no grave. There is no headstone. At the spot in Aberdeen where the Wishkah River runs beneath a bridge on Yonge Street, fans have built an informal memorial. Painted rocks, flowers, handwritten notes, guitar picks pressed into the mud. The city of Aberdeen eventually erected a bench nearby. It reads, "Come as you are. It is as close as you can get." Every year, on the anniversary, the memorial grows a little larger. People travel from across the world to leave things at a river in a small, gray town. We leave Seattle now and travel to the other side of the world. Michael Hutchence spent his last night on Earth in room 524 of the Ritz-Carlton Hotel in Double Bay, Sydney, Australia. It was November 22nd, 1997. He had flown in for a series of INXS concerts, the band's first Australian tour in years. The previous evening, he had attended a party. He made a series of phone calls in the early hours of the morning to his father, to his former girlfriend Michelle Bennett, to his manager Martha Troop, to Paula Yates, the mother of his infant daughter Tiger Lily. The calls became increasingly distressed as the night went on. A hotel employee found him at 11:50 in the morning. He was 37 years old. The coroner ruled his death a suicide. But the finding was disputed almost immediately by his family, by his bandmates, by Paula Yates. The debate has never fully closed, and his mother, Patty, remained one of its most vocal challengers until her own death in 2010. What is not disputed is the timeline. His final hours are documented through phone records, hotel logs, and the testimonies of the people who spoke to him that night. A paper trail that raises as many questions as it answers. INXS had sold over 50 million records worldwide. Hutchence had been one of the most physically magnetic frontmen of his generation, a performer who could hold 100,000 people in a stadium with nothing but movement and eye contact. But in 1992, he suffered a serious head injury following an altercation after a taxi dispute in Copenhagen. Those close to him said he was never quite the same afterward, that something in his temperament had shifted in ways that were difficult to name, but impossible to miss. He was 37 years old. His funeral was held at St. Andrew's Cathedral in Sydney, attended by thousands of fans who lined the surrounding streets. He was initially buried at Rookwood Cemetery, the largest cemetery in the Southern Hemisphere, covering over 300 hectares on Sydney's western edge. His ashes were later exhumed and returned to his family. Where they rest now is not publicly known. His daughter, Tiger Lily, just 16 months old when he died, was eventually adopted by Bob Geldof, Paula Yates's former husband, after Yates herself died of a heroin overdose in 2000. The losses kept compounding long after Room 524 went quiet. Now we cross the Atlantic and arrive in New York City. On the morning of June 30th, 1995, Phyllis Hyman was scheduled to perform at the Apollo Theater in Harlem. She never made it to the stage. Her body was found in her apartment at the Osborne, a grand pre-war building on West 57th Street, one of Manhattan's most storied residential addresses, just hours before curtain. She had left a note. It said, in part, that she was tired and fed up with life. She was 45 years old. What makes Hyman's story particularly devastating is how visible her struggle had been, and how consistently it had been minimized by the people and institutions around her. She had spoken openly for years about her battles with bipolar disorder, at a time when that diagnosis carried enormous stigma, particularly for a black woman in the music industry. Her voice was extraordinary, a deep, lush instrument that moved between jazz, R&B, and soul with complete authority. She had appeared on Broadway in Sophisticated Ladies alongside Gregory Hines. She had charted consistently through the 1980s and maintained a devoted following into the 1990s. But the industry had never quite known what to do with her. Too jazz for R&B radio, too R&B for jazz purists, too outspoken and too unwilling to shrink herself for rooms that wanted something easier. She had been dropped and re-signed by labels more than once. Her financial situation was precarious in ways that rarely matched her public profile. Her final album, I Refuse to Be Lonely, was released posthumously, its title landing with unbearable irony, given what her final note had said. She is buried at Ferncliff Cemetery in Hartsdale, New York, the same grounds that hold Judy Garland, Malcolm X, and Thelonious Monk. Her grave is simple. Her name, her years, and nothing else. The Apollo Theater went ahead with the show that night. Her absence was announced to the audience from the stage. We stay on the eastern side of the Atlantic for the next stop. Cardiff, Wales, January 31st, 1995. Richey Edwards, rhythm guitarist and primary lyricist for the Manic Street Preachers, checked out of the Embassy Hotel in London at around 7 in the morning. His car was found 2 weeks later at a service station near the Severn Bridge, a crossing that had been the site of numerous suicides. The engine was cold. The battery was dead. It had been sitting there for some time. Richey Edwards was never found. He was 27 years old at the time of his disappearance. He was legally declared dead in 2008. There is no grave. There is no confirmed resting place. There is no body. What there is, a body of writing that remains among the most intellectually dense and emotionally raw in British rock. Edwards had co-written lyrics referencing Sylvia Plath, the Holocaust, anorexia, and self-destruction, not as provocation but as testimony. In 1991, he carved the words "for real" into his own arm with a razor blade in front of a journalist who had questioned whether the band's intensity was genuine. In the weeks before he disappeared, He had given a series of interviews. He had given away personal possessions to friends and acquaintances. He had visited his family in Blackwood, Wales, for what would turn out to be the last time. On January 31st, he drove to London, checked into the hotel, and was seen leaving early the next morning. No transaction, no sighting, no trace. The Manic Street Preachers eventually continued without him, dedicating their landmark 1996 album, Everything Must Go, to his memory. It became their biggest commercial success, reaching number 2 in the UK charts. Edwards' share of the band's royalties continues to accumulate in a trust administered on his behalf. Somewhere, his account still grows. Now we travel to Coopersville, Michigan, a small town of a few thousand people just west of Grand Rapids. Shannon was born there. He died in California, but he was brought home to Michigan. On February 8, 1990, the man born Charles Whedon Westover was found dead at his home in Santa Clarita, California. He was 55 years old. Shannon had been one of the defining voices of early 1960s pop. Runaway, his 1961 debut single, reached number 1 on both sides of the Atlantic and stayed on the American charts for 13 weeks. The falsetto break in the middle of that record remains one of the most instantly recognizable moments in the history of popular music. But his 1990 death came at what should have been a triumphant moment of reinvention. He had been personally selected by Tom Petty to replace the recently deceased Roy Orbison in the Traveling Wilburys. Recording sessions had already begun. A new chapter was opening at exactly the moment it closed. He had recently been prescribed Prozac, then newly introduced to the market, its side effects not yet fully understood or disclosed to prescribing doctors. His family later attributed his death in part to the medication's documented effect on mood in the early weeks of use. A wrongful death claim was considered but never pursued. He is buried at Coopersville Cemetery, returned in the end to the small town that made him. His headstone reads, "The Voice of an Era." We cross now to the woods outside Storrs, Connecticut. April 6, 1998. Wendy O. Williams, frontwoman of the Plasmatics, the most confrontational punk act America had ever produced, walked into the woods near her home and did not come back. She was 48 years old. She had left a note. It was articulate, considered, and calm. She wrote that she did not believe people had the right to make others suffer simply by staying alive when they no longer wished to. It read less like a farewell and more like a philosophical position she had held for some time and had now decided to act on. She had been living quietly in those final years, working as a wildlife rehabilitator, nursing injured animals back to health, raccoons, birds, deer. People who knew her in that period described someone gentle and purposeful, far removed from the performer who had once detonated cars on stage in front of shrieking crowds. She had also been nominated for a Grammy for Best Female Rock Vocal Performance in 1985. She lost to Tina Turner. The nomination alone was treated as an anomaly by an industry that had spent years trying to ignore her entirely. Her ashes were scattered in the woods she had walked into. There is no marker, no official grave, no place to visit. What she left behind: a Grammy nomination, a legacy no performer has matched, and a note that asked to be taken seriously. We remain in 1998 because April of that year claimed two figures from the darker edges of the same musical world within 5 days of each other. Los Angeles, April 1st, 1998. Rozz Williams, born Roger Allen Painter, co-founded Christian Death in Los Angeles in 1979. The band is widely credited with originating American Gothic rock, a genre that went on to influence decades of musicians, while Williams himself remained largely invisible to mainstream audiences throughout his life. He was found at his West Hollywood apartment. He was 34 years old. Williams had dissolved and reformed Christian Death multiple times across his career, toured relentlessly through Europe and America, and recorded prolifically under multiple names and projects. He had spoken about depression. He had attempted suicide before. He created art that processed those experiences directly and without softening, music that functioned as documentation as much as performance. He is buried at Hollywood Forever Cemetery in Los Angeles, resting place of Cecil B. DeMille, Dee Dee Ramone, and Johnny Ramone, among many others. His grave marker is modest. Fans leave roses. On the anniversary of his death, small gatherings appear at Hollywood Forever without announcement or organization, people who found something in his work that they could not find anywhere else. From Hollywood Forever, we move now to a story that began on a television soundstage in Burbank. Dana Plato played Kimberly Drummond on Different Strokes from 1978 to 1984, one of the most watched sitcoms in American television history. The show ran for 8 seasons, and at its peak, drew over 40 million viewers per episode. What the show did not do was prepare any of its young cast for what came after. The post-Different Strokes stories, Plato's, Gary Coleman's, Todd Bridges's, have become one of the grimmer chapters in the history of American child stardom, one that gets worse on examination. Plato's years after the show had been defined by financial collapse and public humiliation. In 1991, she held up a Las Vegas video store with a pellet gun to cover her rent. The tabloids treated it as a punchline for years. On May 7, 1999, the night before she was found dead, she appeared as a call-in guest on The Howard Stern Show. Listeners phoned in to mock her on air. She responded throughout with composure and apparent calm. She died the following morning at her manager's home in Moore, Oklahoma. She was 34 years old. The coroner ruled her death an accidental overdose of Valium and Lortab. Her fiancé, Robert Menchaca, disputed the ruling publicly and maintained it had not been accidental. The case was never formally reopened. She is buried at Forest Lawn Memorial Park in Goodlettsville, Tennessee. Her son, Tyler Lambert, raised largely apart from her, died by suicide in 2010. He was 25 years old. We end where the music was always quietest. Athens, Georgia, Christmas Day, 2009. Vic Chesnutt had been making records since 1990, small, intricate, devastating records that attracted the devotion of musicians far more famous than he ever became. REM's Michael Stipe produced his first 2 albums. Madonna's Maverick label released 1. Widespread Panic regularly performed his songs to arenas of thousands, while Chesnutt himself played rooms of a few hundred, if that. Townes Van Zandt called him one of the finest songwriters alive. He had been paralyzed from the chest down since a drunk driving accident in 1983 when he was 18 years old. Medical bills had followed him for the rest of his life. In a 2009 interview, he said he owed over $50,000 in medical debt with no means of repaying it. On Christmas Day, 2009, he died in hospital in Athens following an overdose of muscle relaxants. He was 45 years old. He left behind 15 studio albums, each one a precise UNSP-airing account of what it felt like to inhabit a life that had never quite fit the shape the world expected of it. His grave is in Athens. It is modest and largely unvisited, except by those who already know to look for it. That is where we leave this tour. Not in Los Angeles, not in Seattle, not at any of the bright, famous places where fame accumulates and marble gets carved, but in a small Georgia city, at a quiet grave, for a man most people never heard of whose songs told the truth about almost everything. The 1990s produced some of the most vital music of the 20th century. It also asked an enormous amount of the people who made it, and gave very little back in the way of support, stability, or care. These 9 did not survive that asking.